Hello, welcome to my channel Vaira Citadel. I am Nalini Rajagovindan. In continuation with our preparation for UGC-NET exam, paper 1, in the last few videos, we were discussing about research, like what is research, the various approaches in researches, the various types of research. Today in this video, you are going to learn about an important and interesting concept called variables. Without variables, one cannot do any research. So in this video, we will define what a variable is and see how they are classified. There are many types of variables, but we are going to discuss about some of the most used variables. So viewers, get a clear concept of variables before starting any research. To make you more proficient in identifying the different types of variables, I have given some assignments in the end of the video. Please try to do it without skipping it. First, try it without my explanation. Then you can verify your answer by listening to my explanation. Is that okay? Variable is a trait or an attribute or quality which varies. It can have different magnitude which can be measured. Basically, anything can be a variable. It can be a person, it can be an object, it can be some phenomena or some quality. The two conditions that any variable should meet are that it should vary and it should be measurable. Even the qualitative variables can be quantified and measured. Then only any research becomes possible. Age, for example, take age. Age is an attribute which can take the value of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or even 1 year and 2 months, or 2 years and 3 months, so on and so forth. Another example for variable is your height, which can vary from 1 centimeter to 200 centimeters or anything. So a variable should fulfill both the conditions. Even if one of the condition is missing, then it cannot be a variable. Constant, on the other hand, constant is one which has a fixed value all time and in all places. For example, take the value of pi, which you use in mathematical calculation. It is always, the value of pi is always 22 by 7 or 3.14 at all times, anywhere and everywhere. So it cannot be a variable. It is a constant. Now that we have defined variable, we will see how they are classified. There are many ways in which variables can be classified. One way is to group them as continuous or discrete variables. Continuous variables will have all possible values. One example is height. That is, it can be in decimals also. 3.75 meters or 96.64 centimeters. In that way, they are continuous. Height, weight, time, speed, cost, expenditure are all examples for continuous variables. On the other hand, discrete variables can have only one value. The whole number as a value, no fractions. Example, number of children in a family. The number of children, it could be either 2, 3 or 4, 1. Never 3.5 or 3.6. And also number of people in a place. The number of rooms in a house. And number of trees in a forest. So these are all examples for discrete variables. Categorical variables are also known as a type of discrete variables. Example for categorical variable are gender, marital status, teaching method, etc. When we take gender as a categorical variable, it can have two categories, male or female category. In the same way, marital status, it can have two or three categories, married, unmarried, divorced, as the researcher wishes. So the values fall into a definite number of categories. They are categorical variables. Another way of classifying variable is to group them as independent or dependent variable in research studies. Independent variables can be manipulated and they serve as a cause. They are presumed as a cause, whereas dependent variables serve as effect and they are usually measured to find out the effect. We can also talk of independent variable as antecedent which affects and dependent variable as consequent which gets affected. Also, we can talk of IV or independent variable as a stimulus and DV dependent variable as a response. Now, take this example of students' performance and their IQ level, motivation level, parents' involvement level, and time spent on study. In this example, students' IQ level, motivation level, parents' involvement, time spent on study are all independent variables which can be manipulated by the researcher. How does he manipulate it? By introducing it in a study, or by removing it from the study, or by decreasing the time spent or increasing it. So this way the researcher can manipulate it. Thus he has the control over the independent variable and observe it and measure it. And these factors cause changes in the dependent variables, namely students' performance, which is the effect here, and it can be measured. So in this particular example, students' performance is the dependent variable which is dependent upon these independent variables like IQ level, motivation level, parents' involvement and the time spent on study. The researchers can concentrate on one independent variable or maybe two or three according to his study. Thus, dependent variable is the function of independent variables. Independent variables are also called as manipulative variables or treatment variables or experimental variables or predictor variables. These are all the various names given to the independent variables. And we can also define the dependent variable dv as one which changes with a change in the independent variable. And they are also known as outcome variable. Dependent variables are also known as outcome variables. Next, independent variables can be further grouped into four types. They are treatment variable, measured variables, controlled variables, and moderating variables. We will see them one by one. Now, treatment variables. They are usually used in experimental research. We'll study about experimental research in a separate video in detail. The treatment variable is of primary concern in the study. The researcher studies the effect of the treatment variable on the dependent variable, and usually these treatment variables are categorical in nature. For example, method of teaching. which may be categorical, this method or that method. Teaching with computers or teaching without computers. So they are categorical in nature. And the second one is measured variables. They are also of primary concern to the researcher, like the treatment variable, but the measured variable can only be observed and measured, but it cannot be manipulated by the researcher. That is the difference between treatment variable and measured variable. That the measured variable cannot be manipulated by the researcher. Example, the number of children in a family, or the gender, or the marital status. If the researcher is taking all these things into consideration, then he cannot manipulate it. They are what they are. You cannot change the number of the children the participant has. You cannot change the gender, and you cannot change the marital status. So measured variables are also of primary concern to the researcher. They can be observed and measured but cannot be manipulated by the researcher. They can be either categorical or continuous in nature. They are usually used in experimental research or in survey research. And third one is controlled variable. And they are not of primary interest to the researcher. They are of secondary interest. Of course, they do influence the dependent variable, but the researcher's primary focus is not on this variable. So he tries to neutralize the effect of this variable. How does he do it? He does this by any of the following two methods. One, by research design. That means he chooses a design which will neutralize the effect of this controlled variable. He selects persons or the participant with equal level of this controlled variable, whatever it may be. And second, he does this by statistical methods. He uses some statistical methods like covariate analysis, ANCOVA, etc. in order to neutralize the effect of this controlled variable on the dependent variable. Now, fourth one is moderating variable, which is also of secondary importance to the researcher, like the controlled variable, but it cannot be controlled by the researcher. But the interaction effect of this moderating variable along with the treatment variable is studied. Treatment variable will have the main effect, but the moderating variable will have the collaborative effect or the interacting effect on the dependent variable. Let us study all these four groups of variables with an example. Suppose we want to study the effect of the instructional medium, that is the medium of instruction, on the student's performance in English language. In this case, the medium of instruction becomes the treatment variable, which the researcher is going to manipulate. And the measured variable is the mother tongue of the students, which can be observed but cannot be controlled. And parents' education, the level of parents' education may be considered as the controlled variable, because we know definitely parents' education will influence the performance of the students in English. We can control this by having two groups of participants with parents having equal educational background, in which case it is known as controlling by the design of the research. Or this control can be done by choosing appropriate statistical procedures like I told you, ANCOVA. And then comes the moderating variable. Say for example, the attitude. attitude towards a foreign language may be considered as a moderating variable here. A moderating variable can modify the relationship between the IV and DV. It may strengthen or weaken the relationship because attitude towards the foreign language definitely influences the performance in English, but it cannot be controlled. The attitude of the students cannot be controlled. So we can study the interaction effect of the medium of instruction and attitude towards foreign language. Thus, attitude becomes the moderating variable here. Another way of classifying variable is to group them as intervening variable, confounding variable, and extraneous variable. Intervening variable links or it connects or it explains the relationship between the IV and DV. For example, the effect of extra hour coaching on performance in English. Extra hours coaching is the independent variable and performance in English is the dependent variable. And here the practice may become the intervening variable, explaining the effect of the treatment variable, namely the extra hours coaching, which is the independent variable, on the dependent variable, namely the performance in English. In this example, extra hours of coaching influence the performance in English by increasing the practice, which is the intervening variable or the mediating variable. It's also known as mediating variable. Extraneous variables are all other variables which has the potential to affect the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. But these variables are not taken into account by the researcher. They are outside the research study. In the above example, the extraneous variables could be the parents' educational background or their social background or the teacher's motivational level. All these are not considered in this particular study. They are outside the research, but they do influence the result if not controlled by the researcher. Then they become what is known as confounding variable. Confounding variable is one which is hidden and it cannot be completely separated from the experiment completely. Another example for confounding variable is the researcher's bias, unintentional bias towards the desired or expected result. In a study where the effect of teaching in mother tongue on the performance of the students in science, the unintentional bias of the researcher could lead to more devotion towards teaching in mother tongue. This unintentional bias can be objectively identified and can be only kept minimum by the researcher. Yes, friends, now we have come to the best part of the video, namely the assignment. There are two questions given. The first one is, say true or false. The English speaking ability of 10 students, all of whom have got 10 out of 10 score, is a variable. True or false? The second one is fill in the blanks. Response variable is also known as dash. Now think and answer the questions. I'll give you the answer anyway. The first one, English speaking ability of 10 students, all of whom have got 10 out of 10 score, is not a variable. It's false because the first condition of variable is that it should vary. But here all the scores are 10 equal. It does not vary, so it is not a variable. And the second question, response variable is also known as dependent variable. The stimulus is independent variable and the response variable is also known as dependent variable. Here, these three questions are given. 3 research studies are given. So you have to identify the possible variables here, the types of variables possible in these studies. The first one is price and demand. And the second one is the working hours and productivity. The research is on the number of working hours and the productivity. And the third research is on the attention span of the students and the performance level of the student. The relationship, the study is to find out the relationship between the attention span of the students and their performance level. Now tell me the variables, the possible variables that could be used in this study. Now you try on your own with all that I have explained in the previous slides. If you're not able to do it, now you can listen to my explanation. Now in the first study, price and demand, price is IV, independent variable, and demand is dependent variable because we know that any change in the price will affect the demand. So here we can see the cause and effect relationship. The increase or decrease in price is the antecedent and increase or decrease in demand will become the consequent. The price influences the demand. So price is the independent variable and demand is the dependent variable. And in the second case, working hours and productivity. Working hours is the IV and because it could be manipulated by the researcher by increasing the number of working hours or decreasing the number of working hours. So it is the IV and it is the cause and productivity is the effect. It can be only measured but it cannot be manipulated by the researcher. And in the third study, namely attention span and performance level, attention span is the IV and performance level is DV. And here extraneous variables could be health issues of the student. However, you increase the attention span if the health of the students are not good, then it will affect the performance level. It will also influence the performance level. So, if it is not studied in this research, it becomes an extraneous variable. And poor teaching, the teacher's fault, the poor teaching will also affect the relationship between attention span and performance level. So that becomes another extraneous variable. And lack of parental support. So sometimes the parents may not support the students' study. So that may also affect the performance level. So if all these things, health issues, poor teaching and lack of parental support, if they are not controlled by the researcher, they become the confounding variable in this study. Yes, friends, now we have come to the end of the video. Please share your comments and don't forget to subscribe to my channel Vaira Citadel if you find this video interesting and useful. I'll meet you in the next video on scales of measurement used in measuring variables. Until then, bye-bye.